While he waits for jury deliberations in his New York election interference trial to begin, Donald Trump hit the campaign trail with a rally in the South Bronx. On Thursday, Trump took the stage in one of the most Democratic counties in the country and attempted to woo black and brown voters by slamming the black and brown immigrants who've settled in the city.
And these millions and millions of people that are coming into our country, the biggest impact and the biggest negative impact is against our black population and our Hispanic population, who are losing their jobs, losing their housing, losing everything they can lose.
And in another dubious attempt to enhance his credentials with voters of color, Trump invited rappers Chef G and Sleepy Hollow on stage. Both rappers face charges in a sweeping gang case, and one faces attempted murder charges. Come on now. Joining me now, Ashley Etienne, former communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris and former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Susan Del Percio, Republican strategist and an MSNBC political analyst. Okay, this first question is to both of you. Here are what some counter-demonstrators at the rally had to say about Trump's attempt to connect with voters in the Bronx. Watch this.
Nobody who is authentically from the Bronx is willing to co-sign hatred and xenophobia and misogyny and all of the things that this guy represents.
Let Donald Trump know that he is not welcome in the Bronx.
Do you think there's any people you know in the Bronx or friends that would consider voting for him?
No, I don't know anyone that consider voting for him.
So, okay, Ashley, I'm going to come to you first on this, but was Trump really there to court black and brown votes, or was that really about making white voters more comfortable with voting for him?
No, I think it was really twofold. One is to sow doubt about Democrats' commitment to the black and brown community. And we've seen over time, dating back to 2016, when Trump said, what do you have to lose? Right. And ever since that moment, he's ticked up in terms of percentage of black voters from 6% to 8% to 10%. So to some degree, it's actually working. But I would also say the second thing that he's trying to achieve is creating this permission structure for black folks and brown folks to stay home, to say pox on both of your houses. You know, some people buy into the grievance argument, but that's really what it's about, is just peeling off a small percentage and sowing that doubt so people stay home and contributes to the apathy.
There's pox on just one house from my point of view. Susan, what do you think?
Well, a few things. One, let's remember this rally was done when Donald Trump, or organized when Donald Trump thought he'd be in court. So he needed something else to do while he was going to, in theory, be in court. He wasn't. But there are a few things that really should be noted about the Bronx. First of all, last year was the first time in 40 years that a city council member was elected from the Bronx who was a Republican.
Right.
Going back to 2016 to 2020, Donald Trump did 7 points better than he in comparison. But none of this is to say Donald Trump is going to win the Bronx, win New York, or anything like that. Let's take that off the table. But it should show something, especially that win in the city council, that people do look at their current government, and if they are not happy at the city, state, or federal level, they'll try something else. And what we're seeing now in the polling is that especially black men are looking away from Joe Biden. They are going to Donald Trump in small numbers. But when we're talking about margins in Atlanta or Milwaukee, those votes matter.
Right, or Cleveland. Go ahead,
Absolutely.
Ashley.
I would just add one thing. Republicans play a long game compared to Democrats.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a long game strategy. I've been arguing from the White House on the campaign that Democrats should take the same strategy. We should be going to places like Mississippi, which is the poorest state in the union's always been run by Republicans, and we should go to those places and make the case and say, what do you have to lose? You know, you've been in the poorest state run by Republicans. What do you have to lose? Consider an alternative option. And we've not yet done that. But we need to start playing the long game as Republicans do.
Well, long game, not just presidential, because to your point, governors, state legislatures,
I mean, look at Georgia's
and things like that. Right. Susan, No, I'm sorry, Ashley. President Biden's campaign revealed that it plans to adopt a more aggressive approach with Donald Trump after the Manhattan trial ends. Just how hard should the president and the campaign go once the trial is over?
Well, I mean, I think they're adopting an aggressive posture now, today. I mean, just this week, they've released two really, I think, edgy and biting ads that paint Donald Trump for having a penchant for racism, but also paint him as someone who's committed to, undermining the Constitution on day one, serving as a dictator, someone who's twice tried to cheat the election and overturn the government. I mean, so I think that they're taking an aggressive posture now. I think that what they're going to do after the case is the question that's on the table is whether or not they characterize him as convicted or not convicted. I think that is the real question. But they are aggressively now targeting black and brown voters as well as Nikki Haley voters with these messages about who Donald Trump actually is.
Look, if he gets convicted, they better say convicted felon, because it would be the truth. So, Susan, I want to switch gears because tonight Trump is planning to speak at the Libertarian National Convention in order to thwart, that's such a hard word to say, RFK Jr.'s campaign. Is this a further indication that Trump views RFK Jr. as a real threat?
Absolutely, but it was a smart campaign maneuver, even though he will probably be greeted with boos. If he can prevent RFK Jr. from getting the Libertarian line, that will be a huge, significant win for Trump and or Biden, depending on which state and which demographics you're talking about. Because the important thing about the Libertarian Party and why they're both fighting for it is it gives ballot access in nearly every state. I don't think they'll hit 50 this year. It may be 46, 48. But RFK Jr. is nowhere close to that. So I think Trump went in there, even if they don't give it to him, just not to give it to RFK Jr.
Ashley, in the couple minutes that we have left, we would be remiss if we did not point out the fact that today is the 4th anniversary of George Floyd's murder at the hands of a white police officer in Minneapolis. Where are we when it comes to criminal justice reform? And do you think the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act will ever make it through Congress? Maybe not this particular Congress, but if Democrats retake the House in the next Congress, will we have to wait that long?
Yeah, I mean, that was an incredible time in American history.
4 years.
Yeah, not just in terms of the loss and the murder of George Floyd, but also, people around the world were standing in solidarity about the value of Black lives. I was running communications for Pelosi at the time and was charged with the strategy around getting the bill passed. We passed it in 30 days, the fastest bill we've ever passed. But the problem is, and this is what's rarely talked about, is the groups, the civil rights groups, many of the people who come on your show talking about Black lives actually walked away from the bill. And my point to them is if we don't take the bird in the hand, we're actually going to, someone else is going to have to die in more dramatic fashion to get that level of momentum around a bill. Tyree Nichols died. The president went during his State of the Union, made some really remarkable statements about the value of his life and said, something good has to come out of this. And the reality is nothing good really has come out of it. To Biden's credit, he's passed some executive orders that outlaw chokeholds and other aspects of the George Floyd bill. But executive orders are at the whim of the president. We need to codify it into law. And I think the problem here is this is a great vulnerability for the president. He nor the vice president have really done anything to push legislation at the federal level to, push Congress to pass this bill. So I think it's going to continue to be a drag on him, but it continues to contribute to this perception that Democrats show up to the Black community just to get our votes and just gives us lip service and doesn't actually push legislation that benefits us.
Well, I'll tell you this much. The Biden-Harris campaign has been firing on all cylinders going to Black voters, and folks need to understand that the president and vice president can pound the podium as much as they want, but if they don't have a House and they don't have a Senate willing to go along, ain't nothing going to get done.
Absolutely.
Ashley Etienne, Susan Del Percio, thank you both very much for coming to the Saturday Show.